Joy said that I should speak first. So here I am. Well, it is really a great honor to be here on the same platform of Joy. I'm quite sure that you envy my position. You have an opportunity to be on the same platform as a Canadian icon. I'm just an activist, in Tim Brooks' words, destroys international order. I'm indeed a troublemaker because I really try to destroy a lot of the status quo. A lot of the status quo that prevent people from achieving their full potential. A lot of status quo that are unfair to people in underprivileged positions. So that is why in 1989, on June 4, I led 30,000 people demonstrating in front of the Chinese Consulate General's office in Toronto, protesting the crackdown on the student movement in China. In 1987, I led a community and many others to protest Ontario's government's steadfast refusal to allow nursing homes to deliver services to cater to the language and culture of different communities. And indeed, I cracked open the wall that prevent people from being included in this multicultural society. So I'm just a simple human being, and after listening to many of you who spoke here, I am very glad that I'm not a historian and I'm not a legal expert, because they tend to make things very complicated. I'm just a simple human being. I know what is right and what is wrong. I know even if you're poor, if you go to your next door neighbor's house to rob and kill, it's not right. And I only know that whatever happened in history, the truth of it has to be recorded, and let us learn from it, and hopefully preventing it from happening ever again to anyone in the world in the future. So that is the premise from which I'm working on. And but let me tell you about where I am coming from and my own perspective on this conference. And first of all, I want to congratulate the organizers of this conference to bring such a very important history into focus. Unfortunately, there are not too many who are attending today, and that is exactly the reason why the history has to be preserved and history to be learned, and that is exactly the work that I'm doing together with a number of other volunteers in Toronto Alpha, the Association for Learning and Preserving the History of World War II in Asia. I was born in Hong Kong. I came into Canada in 1968 when I was 19. I studied at McGill, and then I went to Albert Einstein of the Shiva University in New York City to take my MD degree. And there I learned a lot about the Holocaust. So after I came back, I attended a lot of Holocaust memorials in synagogues. And I was extremely, extremely touched by the personal story that I was told. And I would agree with the community, the Jewish community, that we would not let anyone forget what had happened in Europe to the Jewish population and to others who were marginalized and who were caught and murdered because of their race or the color or other noticeable or distinguishable traits. I did not know what happened in Nanjing. I have to confess, when I came to North America, my knowledge of World War II in Asia was very, very, very limited. I only heard of Nanjing massacre. I did not know any details. After I began to know the details, I thought something has to be done. Just like the Holocaust, this Asian Holocaust should not be forgotten. And that is when I started to organize the Toronto Alpha. Interestingly enough, there are a number of other people from North America starting to organize similar organizations. So it is not the Chinese government, but the overseas Chinese diaspora that started the whole movement going. And I was one of them, but I was a latecomer. There are a lot of others who started the movement a lot earlier. There was a woman that by the name of Nancy Tong and Christina Lee, who probably made the first documentary about the horror. Nancy Tong is a Canadian citizen residing in Toronto. I know her when she was in Toronto. She went to New York City, and when she started to make a documentary about Nanjing massacre as well as other World War II atrocities, she came back to Toronto to fundraise, and I was one of those who helped her to fundraise to make that documentary. But unfortunately, this documentary was not given any credit. The documentary is called In the Name of the Emperor. I believe that a lot of these learned historians probably have already seen it, and it was one of the first of many to come later. And her book, her documentary has a great impact on Iris Cheng, because Iris Cheng later watched the documentary, and she also went to see the exhibits organized by one of similar organizations like Alpha in California. She learned about the Nanjing massacre, and then she decided to write a book on this subject. Without Iris Cheng's book, I don't think we would be here today, because it is a woman who was born, a Chinese woman who was born in North America, and who raised the consciousness of the world on this atrocity. Otherwise, this would be covered up, this would be forever under the rug, except in some parts of the academic world. But it is not in other people's conscience. When I started organizing Toronto Alpha in early 1997, I met with very cool, probably cold reception from the Chinese community. I was disappointed, to say the least. I thought that all human beings, particularly the Chinese community, which China suffered the most during World War II in Asia, should have conscience and should have the emotion to make sure the world would not forget what had happened. But the cold reception just made me shiver. I saw no light of hope at all until the end of 1997, when I read an excerpt in Newsweek about Iris Cheng's book, and I saw a ray of hope at that time. So without knowing Iris, I gave her a cold call. Somehow I found the phone number. I told her what I did. I told her I was a troublemaker, going against the authorities in Toronto, going against the white establishment, making all sorts of trouble, but I'm quite sure that I could promote her book well in Canada. So I bought 2,000 books from HarperCollins, and I promoted her book in Canada long before she became the bestseller in the New York Times. And that opens subsequent my intensive volunteer work in Alpha, bringing this history to the classrooms in Toronto and beyond. As John introduced me a little bit earlier, there is another partner, Tekla Lead. I believe some of you do know him, do know her. Actually, we started this movement 3 days apart, independently, from different ends of Canada. I started in Toronto 3 days before she started it in Vancouver. And then we combined together, call ourselves Canada Alpha, to promote the inclusion of World War II history in Canada, because as multicultural as Canada is, Canada's world history in the classrooms is mainly one which is Eurocentric and North American at best, and nothing to include a huge population and a very important part of the world called Asia. In the last 15 years, we have been working with educators in Ontario particularly, also in BC, Alberta, and other provinces in Canada, and internationally bringing educators from Australia, from Europe, from Japan, for study tour, peace and reconciliation study tours in Asia. So over the last 8 years, we have brought over 250 educators, many of them from Canada, but some from United States and other parts of the world, to Shanghai, Nanjing, Harbin, Seoul, Korea, and to Japan as well, so that our educators could learn history where history happened, talking to historians, activists, survivors, perpetrators along the way, so that they get a full glimpse of what happened during World War II in Asia. And that is also when I gained a lot of knowledge about this horrible part of history and of humankind. Let me turn to a conversation with Joy. I know Joy less than 3 years. I went to a meeting called by Article 9 group in Toronto, and this group is to prevent Japan from changing the constitution, from erasing Article 9 from their constitution. That particular evening, I heard Joy for the first time. She started with, the road to Nagasaki has to go through Nanjing. And I was deeply touched by what she said. And afterwards, we became very good friends. She invited me to her house for dinner. We went together to see Yihong, the center that I established in Toronto, taking care of not only Chinese Canadians, but also Japanese Canadians, Canadians of South Asian descent, and also Filipino Canadians. Community in which there is no long-term care homes to care for their seniors in their culture and in their language. So that is the story, and I have talked so long, and Joy, do you think that you could go on?
Is this on? Hello? Is it on?
Yes.
Well, there's a long road. I was saying this a moment ago, my head is blank. And here I am with you learned people and with a blank mind. And maybe that's the way it is for writers. We, at least I'm that kind of writer where I don't know ahead of time what I'm going to write or what I'm going to say. I'll find out later what it was that was said. I'll learn later from what I've written what it was that I was writing. So it's another thing to think that when I wrote Obasan way back there in 1980 or so, when it was done, and I had no idea what had happened to the silent mother, and so I presented the book the way it was. And then the publisher said, well, what happened to the mother? And I said, well, I don't know. She disappeared. That's the way life is. Isn't that okay? She just disappeared, and I don't know. That was the truth. And the publisher said, well, the reader has to know. So I took the back book into myself again for another year. And I have no idea where it came from, the idea of Nagasaki. But there it was a clue at the beginning of the book, August 9, 1972. And the book goes on and on and on. You don't know what happened to the mother, but at the end you find out that she was somehow in Nagasaki. And I've only been finding out in the last few years, well, maybe the last decade or so or more, when I'm writing the book that I've been trying to write for so long, called Geriatric to Nagasaki, that I'm beginning to understand why that was such an important event that I had to make sense out of. Now, they say that humans are unlike animals in very few significant ways. We have language, so do animals. We use tools, so do animals. But humans are creatures that have to have meaning. And following the Holocaust in Europe, they say that, some people will say that it's too dignifying of an act like the Holocaust, an action like that, to dignify it with meaning. It has no meaning. We live in a world in which we can no longer have meaning. And so that's one meaning, that there is no meaning. It is not a meaning that satisfies me. I need to have meaning, and I will keep struggling for it and searching for it, and the fact, and to say there is no meaning does not satisfy my heart. So Nagasaki has a peculiar meaning for me. And along that route to that, I stumbled blindly into Nanjing. I didn't know about it. I can remember having heard that there was a book about it. And I thought maybe it was called The Rape of Nanjing. I certainly wasn't going to read it. I wished it were not true, whatever it was. And when I heard that the author had committed suicide, I said in my heart, well, I guess maybe that's the end of that. We're not going to hear about that anymore. It probably isn't true. And then I heard that there were people in Japan who were denying it, who were saying it was filled with falsehoods and so on, and I thought, oh, well, okay, I'll accept that. And I didn't want to really think about it. So anyway, in the windy waves of the writer's pen, I happened one day to be invited to hear a play by Marjorie Chan. So I went along. And that was the beginning of the change of my life and the direction of that road to Nagasaki. I learned that the person who wrote this book was so young. She was only in her 20s. How could the person who was only in her 20s have any clue as to anything like the things she'd written about? I read the book eventually, and I saw the pictures. And the scales from my eyes, the will to blindness, were wrenched from me and from my soul. I couldn't understand how, if even a part of this were true, how it was so unknown. How could that be? The whole world has heard about the Holocaust in Europe. There are so many remembrances and books and movies and everything else about it that you cannot not know. And how, I mean, here we have the 75th anniversary of one of the worst atrocities that you can imagine. You cannot imagine it because of its horror. Just as you cannot imagine the horror of the Holocaust. And where is that knowledge kept? In the people of this city and in the academics? Where is it known? I mean, this room is almost empty. And it chills me that something this powerful, this volcanic, that is hidden still, and it requires the work of individuals like Joseph and Thecla, and others who rally around them and who gather momentum and who spread the word and give it to the children in the schools and tell the people. It's left to them to bring the news forth. Where are the Elie Wiesels that will tell these stories and let these things, the images, the unspeakable images from these things, remain in us so that they are rooted within us and tell us that this, yes, is the human condition. We are part of it. And how does it affect us and what does it mean? Well, in my book, the bombing of Nagasaki is also part, I mean, it is more known, but the meaning of it applies to the meaning of Nanjing as well. And for me, the meaning, I'll tell you just briefly how the meaning came to me for the bombing of Nagasaki. It is that this very strange event on this particular day, when it was not supposed to be on that day, it was supposed to be 2 days later. But all kinds of things that I won't detail them here happened that should not have made it happen the way it did. It was not intended to go where it did. But what it did was this bomb that left this Christian country, the United States of America, go and fall exactly where it did in the Urakami neighborhood, fell on the preeminent spot of Christianity in all of East Asia, on the hidden Christians that had survived centuries of persecution and had managed to come home. That, exactly 2 blocks away from their cathedral, which housed 5,000 people, fell. So the Christians had killed their very best friends. And the meaning to me of that is that the words of the one that they followed, the ones, the Christians in the West and the Christians in the East, the most important words that Jesus said were this commandment: love your enemies. And to me, Nagasaki transformed that event. It transformed, not that event, transformed that commandment. It was no longer a proscription. It had been made into a description. You don't have to love your enemies anymore. You can't anyway. You can't do what you can't do. You don't have to love them. All you have to do is to discover the ways in which you already do. You loved your enemies. Find that out before it's too late. So that's what it means to me. And that's what the story of Nanjing and Nagasaki mean to me. And what my relationship with Joseph means to me. We are good friends. I think we will be friends till the day we die. We are bound together in a longing and a hunger for reconciliation. And we are not enemies. Though, and when I wanted Joseph to come with me to Nagasaki when I was invited to an event there, and I was denied this, and the chapter in my book that describes this is seen as so offensive that if I publish it, they will sue me, and so on and so on. And I am seen as being Japan bashing because I stand with people like Joseph. I know I am not Japan bashing. I know that I want to write this because I love Japan. I do not bash this country. All I long for is that we will be reconciled. I long for that reconciliation between China and Japan. Can you imagine the power and the joy of that when it happens, because it will, one day, someday. And so I'm here with Joseph to promote our reconciliation, not that we were ever enemies, but we belonged in enemy camps, because my ancestry is from that country. So we were in enemy camps, but we don't need to be. And I think that this is the direction for which I long